So I'll introduce our panel. You've already had a chance to meet Joanne Jackson. She's the producer of the film. And next to her is Anouk Hoedeman, who is the coordinator of Safe Wings Ottawa. It's sort of in the same lines as the FLAP organization that was profiled in the film. Ted Chesky, started back with him, Nature Canada's Senior Conservation Manager for Bird Conservation, Education and Networks. And Michael Runts, Carleton University, no doubt heard on CBC Radio a few times. Whenever we have some odd bird that's in downtown Ottawa, we call Michael to find out what's happening. He's a Carleton University natural history professor, and certainly, arguably, one of the region's best known naturalists. So a big thank you to our panel for being here. And I don't know if they all know this, but I've interviewed all four of them at one point for CBC, including Joanne this morning, so I don't know if you had a chance to tune in, but I'm going to start with you, Joanne. I'll put a question to you, and the way I'd like to do is maybe just throw a question to one of you, and then if the others want to weigh in as well. But Joanne, for you, first of all, congratulations on a wonderful film.
Thank you.
It's a bit of an emotional roller coaster ride, though, because there's the hope, the beauty, and then the sadness, and it's easy after something like that maybe to feel depressing as well. I hope we can leave here with hope, because I think that was your goal with the film, to offer hope that there is work happening.
Yeah, absolutely, and every one of us can make a difference. There's small things that you can do, and I hope we can talk about that. And we heard about bird-friendly coffee earlier, and that's one of the simplest things you can do for 1 cent a cup more than what you're paying for your normal coffee. You can make a difference for birds, and a small coffee shop that serves 100 pounds of coffee a week can save 17 hectares of land in a year.
And certainly that's where I was going to head to eventually, about things that we can do, right? And not just on a global scale. We're not just going to march off to Alberta and close the oil sands all just like that, but there are things as of tonight, tomorrow, that we can do in that. But for you, Joanne, in researching this film, because you didn't only produce it, you were in charge of all the research for it. What was the biggest eye-opener for you?
Well, reading Bridget's book, Silence of the Songbirds, was the inspiration for the film, so that was a big eye-opener right away. And starting to think about all the issues that are affecting birds, I just think I was transformed in just becoming more aware of birds. And as I mentioned to you this morning on the radio, I now have 7 bird feeders and a heated bird bath in my yard. And I'm not a birder. I never was, but I just think this is a really, really important story. And I've been working on this for 5.5 years. We started in 2010. It took us 3 years to get the financing together for the film. We filmed over a period of 15 months. We had to do 2 spring migrations to actually get enough birds and to be able to cover the things that we wanted to do, because a lot of things happened at the same time. And I'm not tired of the subject matter. I think the world of birds is deep and beautiful, and there's a lot to learn from it. So it's transformed me and made me more of an environmentalist.
And maybe it's an opportunity, because you said you're not a birder. You can ask our audience, put your hand up if you would label yourself a birder. Go. Just for our panel's benefit, when they start rhyming off. But that's good to see, because of the general interest. I was certain we'd have only birders, and we'd be talking to people who already care passionately about it.
Yeah. One of the things too is the science is complex, and because there's no one reason why birds are disappearing, it was really important for us as filmmakers, and for Sue Reiner, the director, myself, the other producers. We all wanted to make sure that this was a really accessible film, and that it's not just oriented to birders. We really want ordinary people to see the film and understand how important birds are to all of us.
It worked for me. I don't consider myself a birder, and you created me a soft spot for even the robin.
That's great.
I never got robins. I never understood them, but
they're in 10% decline right now. Robins are. So even they are in decline.
Perhaps I could put the next question to Michael to localize this bit, because we traveled the world in Joanne's film. How would you describe, Michael, the birdsong situation, songbird situation in our area?
It has changed a lot in the last 50-odd years that I've been looking at birds. 40, 50 years ago, the spring chorus was almost deafening at times in our forests. We still have spring song, we still have dawn choruses, but it's so much subdued to what it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. A major change. We have lots of green space around Ottawa. It's a great place to be compared to spots like Hamilton, perhaps, or other cities in Canada and around the world. But still, even here in our green spaces, which we have so much of, birds have declined dramatically. So it's better here than many areas, but still, Giacomo, it's frightening.
Do we know why?
Some of the reasons shown in this fabulous documentary. It should be shown to every school around the world. It's powerful. I wish I had seen this before I came here, because there's such emotions I'm going through right now after seeing it. You know, a little bit of humor here and there. I love humor, and some tears float at times. Anger curses my veins at times as well. And so right now I'm still trying to calm down from that emotional roller coaster ride I went through. That shows how powerful the film is. So I'm very critical about nature documentaries, and very few impress me, and this one really impressed me. It hit the mark.
One of the things we knew is that we had to be really accurate with the soundtrack, and I showed it to John Fitzpatrick at the head of Cornell Lab of Ornithology, gave him a little sneak preview, and he said we were fully prepared that there would be mistakes in the sound in the film, and we didn't have any. They were really, really happy with their soundtrack.
I was amazed by the Yellowhammers in Europe, and you know, you see movies like Blood Diamonds and Black-throated Green Warbers from North America and Africa singing and so on. There's mistakes everywhere. And it drives me crazy watching a movie.
Were you listening to CBC this morning? Because Joanne made that exact same reference.
Oh, I have no idea.
Well, one of the fellows from the American Bird Conservancy told me that a blood diamond in the mountain scenes, which are supposedly shot in South Africa, had West Virginia birds.
Yeah, but Black-throated Green Warbers,
yeah.
Unacceptable.
Yeah, no,
Unacceptable.
Absolutely. Boycott that film. No, and what's amazing too was in this documentary how many species were shown. Do you know how many were shown in that film? Does anybody here know what's only keeping
There's something you don't get to put that in your book, though.
I have all the species listed in the transcript, but I haven't actually added up the numbers. But a lot of the boreal birds were filmed by a Carleton grad named Joshua C., who's an amazing videographer and cinematographer, and so we were thrilled that he came on board to help us with this film. And he actually does work with Aaron Bain up in the boreal forest, counting birds as well. He's had that in his background, so he really knows how to get the shots. And he also went to Costa Rica, and they got all those Costa Rica birds in about 5 days shooting in Costa Rica, which is amazing.
I want to turn to Anouk, who, as I mentioned off the top, is with the coordinator of Safe Wings Ottawa. Just for our understanding, kind of sort of in the same vein as Flap is portrayed in Toronto.
Yes, pretty much the same thing. We're researching bird collisions with buildings and trying to do what we can to prevent those collisions in the long term.
And how is the situation in Ottawa?
There's only, I think, 1 or 2 buildings that have any kind of treatment on them to prevent collisions. So we do have quite a bad situation. I would estimate that there's probably at least 500,000 birds a year that are colliding with buildings in Ottawa from the numbers that we have at this point.
So you've been at this for how long in Ottawa?
Just over 2 years.
Do you approach building operators? Where do you concentrate your efforts?
We've been really starting with the public buildings and institutions. Private buildings are a little bit trickier because you don't want to be kicked off the property and have people tell you that you can't look for birds there. Because we want to save as many of the birds as we can, but we also collect all the dead ones that we find so that we can document them, so that we know what species it was and what day it was and where it was, what side of the building, maybe the weather conditions, so that we're starting to see the patterns now.
But it would seem from an outsider's point of view that if the federal government is this landlord in the area of some of the buildings, that would seem an easy way to get the biggest bang for your buck.
Yeah, and we are starting to do that, so with the change of government, we're a bit more optimistic. So are we. So we started talking. I had a meeting with Catherine McKenna's staff last week, who's our local MP and the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, to see what we can do with federal buildings. And we're also starting to approach the city to see if Ottawa can develop bird-safe development guidelines for new buildings, and maybe start other initiatives that may be able to protect birds, such as reducing light pollution.
And you'll be sure to tell your favorite CBC reporter when that's going to happen, so they can have a scoop, right?
For those of you who haven't seen it, Anouk does a fabulous job on Facebook, and her team, they post pictures of birds they've rescued and little videos and stuff like that. It's great to see that.
So Anouk, I get the sense from you then that even in the past 4 or 5 months, there's more hope now. You can see some more changes coming to the landscaping.
Yeah, well, part of it is also that we are a fairly, young group that started a couple of years ago, and it takes a while to sort of, get the lay of the land and figure out what are the patterns, what are the worst buildings. So after, we've done 2 complete years now of documenting collisions. So we also have a much better idea, and we're also much more familiar with the topic. I mean, when I started this, nobody in Ottawa really seemed to know anything about bird collisions. And then after like a year and a half, suddenly I realized, oh, I'm the expert now on bird collisions. But somebody has to be. So.
Thank you, Anouk. Ted of Nature Canada, I think I have a feeling what your answer is going to be when it comes to another contributing factor in the area here. It's cats.
Sure.
What is the situation here when it comes? It was in the films. Is a problem here as well?
Well, that's always a sensitive issue to deal with. So maybe I'll ask the public here to a show of hands. How many of you are cat owners? Okay, keep your hands up if you're a cat owner plus a birder. No. See? Actually, I think most of the hands actually stayed up. As a couple of years ago, Environment Canada, we heard in the excellent film, and congratulations again, Joanne, and you covered the whole gamut of issues. And if I could just add, one of my favorite parts of this movie was is the emphasis on birds singing. There's so many birds that it was shown and filmed actually singing as well. And we often say bird watchers, but I consider myself more of a bird listener than a bird watcher. I love the sound of birds, and we know Silent Spring, Silence of the Songbirds were 2 very important books that were put out, and so I'm very happy there was so much emphasis on that. So we heard Pete Mara from Smithsonian talking about the number of bird fatalities from cats, and Environment Canada a couple of years ago produced a scientific paper, one of many, looking at human-related or associated causes of bird predation. And the estimate for Canada is around 200 million birds a year that fall victim to cats. So our tendency, or I think the gut reaction, is to blame the cats, but that's definitely wrong. Cats bring a lot of happiness to people as well, and I think we have to look at the issue of ownership of cats primarily. About 40% of those 200 million deaths are owned cats, and about 60% are feral cats. So if we just concentrate, we're still talking about roughly 80 million bird deaths from the owned cats. And it's a question of the cat owner's decisions and behavior. They can, I know some cats are difficult to train, but if over time we can change that behavior and keep the cats under control, they don't have to be indoors, they can be outdoors in a catio or a controlled space, or on a... Yeah.
Google it, you'll see. Yes. There's some very, very fascinating backyards that people have with other cats.
There are, and cats need stimulation, and they need to, be able to express themselves, but it can be done in a way that doesn't pose a risk to wildlife, birds, and other types of wildlife as well. And Nature Canada is about to launch a big campaign, and you'll hear about that on the 29th of February with many partners across the country to address this issue.
Thank you. Yes,
I'd just like to add something to that topic. I'd be really curious to know, how many of the birds being caught by cats first hit a window? And I would suspect there's a fair number, because if you have a cat that's caught, you know, a kinglet or a warbler that's usually fairly high up in the canopy, I would think there's a pretty good chance that it might have hit the window of a house and then been eaten by a cat.
Yeah, it's probably.
Don't.
That helps. It helps a bit. Pick up a brochure on the way out on what you can do.
I certainly want to leave enough time for a Q&A at the end, and come back to our panel, because you can think about this for a bit, but the question is going to be, what's the one thing people here can do, even if they aren't birders, just one thing. Joanne already talked about maybe looking at their coffee selection, something they can do to contribute to improving the situation for songbirds. But before we go there, before we go to the Q&A, Joanne, you've got a little video for us.
Yes.
Because people have been wondering how on earth you were able to film these birds in super slow motion like that. So maybe you could just take a minute to set it up, and I'll move out of the way.
Sure. It really was, how do you make the invisible visible? And our director, Sue, when I was doing the research for the film, I found out about the wind tunnel at the University of Western Ontario that AFAR does bird research in. And so we went and we coaxed our way in to do some test footage in 2011. And we were able to use that footage to help us put a trailer together to finance the film. And it took another 2 years to get the permits that we needed from Canadian Wildlife Service to be able to capture some species, house them, and go back and film in the wind tunnel. And so what I have is a short video showing you the behind the scenes of how we did it.
Download it, which is going to take at least 5 minutes.
Okay.
Like it's real time, 3 minutes,
Yeah.
right? So, by the time then if you find another position or whatever, then
Yeah, well, I think we'll keep the same position, but he'll have to capture that bird, bring it back
Yes.
to the tent, bring it back,
Change.
which is going to take a couple minutes. So it's perfect. While you bird run,
Yeah.
he downloads.
Yeah,
it's
that's,
perfect
it
team.
should work out, yeah.
Perfect combo.
okay, you guys let me know whatever works
So
out best.
The challenge is birds like to fly at night with zero light. And we have to illuminate it to photograph it. There's a moment when you're going to get your shot. It's the moment when the bird can fly in a bit of light. It's the moment when we can get it in focus because the depth of field is about ½ an inch. And it's flying, even though the image looks like it's flying slowly, it's flying fast. Very, 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 very fast. Faster than a camera can move, faster than a person can focus. So if it all comes together, it's just magic.
Oh yeah. That was fun. Beautiful bird.
Okay, we are live. So we're live, so we're going to
Good.
try and get the bird as far forward
All right, here
as
we go.
can.
Birds flying. Come on, bud.
People always ask, why do they fly in the wind tunnel? They're flying in place. It's so artificial. But I really think, you know, from their point of view, they want to fly. And all of a sudden, they've got this wind blowing in their face, and they have a natural propensity to open their wings and try and fly away. And now all of a sudden, they are flying. They're exercising. It feels like flight. And they seem to focus on that and not be too distracted by, you know, the fact that the ground's not moving or things like that.
Yeah, they're going to push him forward. It's good.
He's trying to figure out why the sun is on the ground.
Focus on the foreground. Focus, focus, focus. Cut! Yep. Oh, let's grab this. Yeah.
When you work with these kind of animals that are small and they have such amazing speed of reaction that you can't even judge as a human being. Looking through the wind tunnel, all I see is a bird flying back and forth. And when I see the footage that we shot for the film, I see this bird that is sometimes gliding more than it's flapping. What I see is flap, 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 flap. and what's actually happening is flap, flap, and then pull the wings in and glide like a little ski jumper. But they're also looking around and checking out their environment, and these kind of things are just happening too fast for me to even see. So I've gained a huge respect for how much they're able to process and how quickly they're able to respond. To be a good scientist, you have to be inherently creative. You have to be thinking about things in new ways. You have to be looking at information that we have and trying to visualize it in your mind. I think there's a close link between art and science, and they're both very creative activities. So I think that there's a natural link there, but I think there's also an important link in terms of communicating the research that we're doing to everyone else on the planet.
Okay, buddy. Ready to go? Ready to go? There you go. Here we go. Away you go.
We felt it was really important to
Absolutely.
show that the birds were all released and no birds were harmed in our filming.
So, I mean, you set out to make a film to create awareness, educate people, and you ended up educating the scientists.
Well, that's true. Because of the quality of the camera, the phantom camera, which shoots between 800 and 1,000 frames per second, the scientists said they could see things in our shots that they've never seen before. And they have actually used cameras in there before, but they're not the quality that we have. So Chris Giacomo now goes and gives talks around the world and uses some of our footage.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And looking, it was low light, but I spent some time looking there, but also looking at the audience's facial expression. And you have everyone with those shots. They're really...
Oh, that's good. Well, the indigo bunting is just my hero bird, I have to say. And we had one indigo bunting, and he was just a super flyer. He was fantastic. And for the blackburnians and magnolias and stuff, we had a few of those, like maybe five or six of those birds. We had females and males and stuff. So
not bad considering they're not members of the guild.
That's right. But they are the stars of the show.
Yeah. To make sure we leave enough time for audience members who may have some questions up, so I'm still going to come back to you with that one thing you'd like the people to think about on songbirds. Melanie has the microphone, so you put your hand up if you've got a question for any of our panelists right now. Can I chance over here, Melanie?
This is not really about this film, but there's a burning question. I was told that the increase in wind energy, those big windmills that you see all along Lake Ontario, are destroying the birds on their flight patterns. Is that true?
Yes, it is a problem, but there aren't actually that many windmills. It's funny because somebody asked me about this week, that aren't windmills a bigger problem than birds colliding with buildings? The estimates for bird deaths from colliding with buildings are measured in the hundreds of millions. They say up to 1 billion per year in North America, and the deaths from windmills are measured in the hundreds of thousands. So it is a problem, but not of the same magnitude.
Ted?
Specifically, renewable energy is obviously very important. So I make that clear that we should all be supporting it. But I think, like a lot of things, the devil's in the details, and there's probably places where we should be building these and places that we should be avoiding. And there's this thing called Important Bird Areas, which is a program of BirdLife International. There's a number of them on the Great Lakes, and on other places, and I would say there should be a much better effort to avoid putting them in places where we know the birds are concentrating and the impact is going to be greater. And there are some projects down in the Wolf Island area that are hard on birds.
Michael, did you want an opportunity to?
Yeah, not just birds are being hit by the wind turbine, so it is a small effect overall, but still an effect. But bats, migratory bats, island hop. And in the St. Lawrence, we have Wolf Island, Amherst Island, and Prince Edward County itself is an island. We have bats going across, the migratory bats, not all bats migrate, but they're being nailed big time by the wind turbines. There's some evidence now they're being drawn by sound perhaps into the turbine itself. They're not being hit by the blades, they avoid the blades. Their lungs hemorrhage because of the pressure change. And it's a fairly recent discovery, well, in a few years now, that this is what's happening, but we're looking at birds, but we're also ignoring other elements of our natural environment, and bats are a very important part, and they're being nailed by this.
Thank you, an excellent question. Thank you for that.
Thank you for a wonderful film. It made me realize that, at least in my own case, one of the things is that I don't realize when something's not there anymore. And in my own particular case, it suddenly struck me that I haven't heard a whippoorwill where I live in 3 years. So thank you for that. A question, are there any birds that are actually increasing in numbers? I do not particularly like crows, but it seems to me we have a lot more crows and a lot more Canada geese than we used to.
Who wants to field that one? Michael?
Well, we can both do this, tag team, Ted, but there are some species definitely on the increase. Things like American crows, common ravens are spreading southward, which are scavengers, which may benefit from dead birds.
Very much, yes.
And with the constant development of roads through areas, there's more and more roadkill. And not just birds, but amphibians and so on. So the birds that scavenge are doing very well indeed. But there are other birds. Some of the songbirds are actually on the increase, some of the warblers, because some of the farms that have been let go now, and we have small forests evolving in the Ottawa Valley, are supporting birds like American redstars and just as out of warblers, some birds that like the younger habitats. And so there are some birds benefiting by habitat change. So there are some, definitely. But overall, no, the picture is not too good.
Ted?
Sure, if I could add to that, there's the Canadian government and a bunch of partners produced something called the State of Canada's Birds 2012, and there's going to be a State of North American Birds produced this year, and it gives you the overall picture of who's doing well and who's not doing well. And I can say from the State of Canada's Birds, as some groups of birds have actually increased quite a bit, in addition to what Michael was talking about, the birds of prey actually have done fairly good. Now, the standard from which we're measuring is 1970. That's very important, because a lot of the populations were decimated by DDT, which was banned shortly thereafter. So they're recovering, they're doing well. We're seeing a lot more merlins, bald eagles, and birds like that. Waterfowl as well. We invest a lot in managing for waterfowl, and some adapt very well to human conditions, like the Canada goose, which loves our grain fields, loves our thermal pollution, and the big protected areas we call cities.
Thank you for the question. We're at the back here is the next one, and then we'll come down here. Yeah, hope I haven't missed it. Yes, go ahead.
Films like this really educate the population, and you can bring this into grade schools and start out really well. I'm a veterinarian from the United States, and the American Veterinary Medical Association is commonly looked to when people are trying to make decisions about to do a trap, neuter, and release program. The AVMA in January decided to bring in the option of euthanasia because of they estimate 1 billion birds in the US are killed by feral cats as well as household cats that get out. So we have changed it so that euthanasia now comes onto the table, so people don't just say you can't euthanize because it's not best practice, as quoted by the AVMA. Also, education for local municipalities. Talk about what you have. In Masham, they have the swifts that live in the church steeple, or at least come during the summer, and they're a rarity up here in Canada. They're getting to be endangered. Also, the windmills that were talked about, in the US, there's a lot of them in California. And a lot of times they get put in because of green energy, but then they put them in migratory routes before they think about things. So people have to look and find out best practices. One other thing about your bird feeders. Many people like having bird feeders, but they also draw in a lot of birds into a closed area, and you'll sometimes have disease being spread by your bird feeders. So one has to be careful. We like to listen to the birds, but on the other hand, we may be endangering them as well by concentrating them in that small area. So I just wanted to make those few comments. But this is excellent.
Thank you very much, and thank you for staying after the comment about Americans in Cuba. We're going to go to our last question here. We've got one more here. Yes?
Okay,
you can just say it.
Okay. Well, actually, just because everyone's facing this way, if you don't mind, I have some good news, which is in Ottawa, there's an organization called Ottawa Bird Count.
Yes.
And you may have heard of it. That's right.
Yeah.
And what they do is train citizens to act as scientists and help them count birds, and also train scientists to act as citizens and volunteer with Ottawa Bird Count. So they are actually the only urban bird count, or the biggest urban bird count in North America. And you may have heard of them. Adam Smith is the, I'm just getting to know him, but I think he's the chief scientist who's actually, I joined them because they do bird song training. That's the most beautiful.
And he was announcing our unofficial bird of Ottawa.
The chickadee.
That's right.
We were there in the field with him.
Yes.
And so I did bring some information.
Gets me every time.
If people are interested, I did bring some posters that give a contact info and just talk about what they do. But basically, they train people to listen and identify birds. And if you're not as brilliant or experienced as some, you can go out with a recorder. So they're also asking people to go out into the field and record.
Wonderful.
At 4 o'clock in the morning. My name is Suzanne, but the organization is Ottawa Bird Count.
Well, people can come after.
Sure.
We have to be wrapping up because
thank you.
I saved my last question, and Melanie, I know we have to clear out because there's another screening after this, right? Yeah, so I do apologize, but I think our panelists, I speak for myself, at least I'll be around, and maybe others can entertain those last questions there. So the question for you, if you can keep it short because we're short on time, but the one thing someone could do, Joanne, you already had your go at it. You had your go with the coffee. I know.
I would say if you have any highly reflective windows in your house that are reflecting trees, or if you have parts of your house that birds might be able to see straight through, like picture windows that face each other, look, there's brochures out at the entrance on what you can do to make your home safer for birds, or you can visit our website, has a lot of information, safewings.ca. So make your own home safe for birds, because a lot of them do die at residential buildings, 44%.
And turn lights off, outside lights off at night.
And turn lights off at night, yeah.
Interesting.
Ted?
I think the challenge here is we are influenced in our own behavior by what our friends and what other people do, and I think that we need to take it up ourselves, start with ourselves, and maybe try to convince our families and our neighbors to do. There's so many different things we can do. And I mentioned the cat one, or the windows, the coffee. There's so many things, but it has to start with ourselves. And often we learn things through our children, so I think education is a very big part of it, and I'm sure Michael can talk to that better than I can.
That's actually my thing, is to show a kid a bird. I think direct contact with nature is the key in the younger generation to get the direct exposure, because when you have direct contact, then that inspires interest, and that inspires knowledge, and that inspires concern. And I think that's where we have to really hit hard now as younger people. And just that little thing, I wish a colleague of mine had been exposed to birds, because he won a major award recently for his chemistry work in designing a fungus to be applied to spruce and fir trees. It's being applied now to millions of trees in the Maritimes, that makes them unpalatable for boreal forest insects like spruce budworm, which is the main food for most of our songbirds in North America. And if this spreads to the boreal forest, if they refine it and make it so that nothing eats these trees, that means no food for our birds. And that is, to me, one of the most serious threats on the horizon that's not been made aware yet to most of it.
You're supposed to leave us with something positive.
I know, so show a kid a bird.
I want to thank our panelists, Joanne Jackson. Thank you. We'll give the final word. I think we can give the final word to the producer of the film, Joanne.
If you want to know more about the film, go to our website, themessengerdoc.com. I have a few postcards here. And also there's a sign-up list. If you'd like to join our mailing list, we'll let you know when educational DVDs and those sort of things become available. You can sign the clipboard out at the desk. Okay?
Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you.
Joanne Jackson, producer of the film. Anouk Hoodiman with, I want to get the name right, Safe Wings Ottawa. Ted Chesky of Nature Canada, and Michael Runs of Carleton University. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to Melanie. It's been a pleasure. For those who have some other questions, come on up. Thanks again for letting me be part of this. Take care. Safe drive home, everyone.